Namaskar and welcome to our series of programs on the economy. Today, we're going to be discussing the meetings that have taken place in the run up to the BRICS summit. We are specifically looking at the trade ministers meeting as well as the finance ministers meeting. These meetings are important in setting the economic agenda and fine tuning it before the BRICS summit. Taking us through this discussion, we have with us two eminent guests. Let me introduce you to them. Professor Sachin Chaturvedi is Director General, RIS for Developing Countries. He is a Global Justice Fellow at Yale University. His expertise is development economics, policy, South-South cooperation. He's done his postdoctorate from Yale University. Dr. Arvind Veermani is the Chairman of the Foundation for Economic Growth, a former Chief Economic Advisor to the Finance Ministry. He's a former Executive Director of the International Monetary Fund, and his expertise, macroeconomic policy, finance, international trade. He's done his PhD from Harvard University. Professor Chaturvedi, let me start with you. The focus in these meetings has been on digital technologies. In fact, the trade ministers also believe that the new technologies are important for modernization and transformation of industry. Now, the question that comes to mind is that are these digital technologies the norm, or do you see them as still disruptive in the order of things?
Thanks, Max. I think India's presidency of BRICS is extremely important. As you know, this is 15th year of BRICS establishment. And I think the 15th year as India celebrates BRICS and also the bring in the gravitas of the presidency, we are trying to focus on consolidation. So the technologies and the usage of them are trying to bring in greater heft in the working of BRICS itself. We are seeing even the PMJDY, the Jandan Yojana, has given the kind of huge development experience that we have. And this huge development experience comes in from the numbers that we have. Something like 43 crores have actually got the PMJDY. And out of that, if you see 55% are women, and out of them, almost 63% are in the rural areas. And that is giving the larger heft to our sort of coverage when we are looking at it in terms of deposits, which has something like 1,46,230 crores. So that is a huge number by any account. And that's where our usage of technology, I think, is absolutely important. We are also trying to see how the tele-density has expanded. It has expanded in India, but also in South Africa and Brazil. You would see more and more efforts. In fact, the Bolsa Familia of Brazil was one of the starting points for social enabler and bringing in technology.
Dr. Veermani, with regard to disruptive technologies, the BRICS countries talk of assessing implications, encouraging whether they are progressive, safe, equitable, and only then looking at these disruptive technologies. Would you say that, post-COVID, we are in a new paradigm in any case, which has a lot of digital, and whether this is disruptive or not? What do you see as your comments?
So there are two aspects to this. One is, in a global comparative advantage sense, where countries with declining population and scarce human resources will focus on these technologies to kind of substitute for skilled labor and would be more capital intensive. We, on the other hand, have a comparative advantage in human resources over the next 20, 30 years. So we should focus on improving the quality, using these technologies to improve the quality of our human resources, skills, whatever, and then multiplying or using them to enhance the effectiveness or productivity of these resources. So that is one aspect. The second aspect, as you said, is COVID related. Till COVID happened, we were lagging in the use of e-marketing, e-services, etc. But during COVID and after, we've suddenly we are expanding much more faster, and therefore we will be closing the gap much more quickly now. So we are now part of the that gap is being covered, and we are progressing very fast.
Indeed, but Dr. Chaturvedi, the importance is also of investment in human resources for these emerging technologies. I mean, after all, they are, taking a broad sweep of the entire economy. So, how crucial is collaboration in human resource development and skill set development, especially for emerging technologies?
I think this is crucial, and Mark, as you would appreciate, for Brazil, South Africa, and India, three of us are at one stage of development when it comes to new technologies. China is in another league, and so is Russia. In case of these three, which we often call as IPSA, and incidentally, after almost a decade, IPSA summit is also happening back to back. So for almost all the development challenges, IPSA holds the crux for BRICS, and human resource development is very crucial. In case of India itself, we have seen through Deen Dayal Upadhyay Kaushal Vikas Yojana, we have developed a sort of important dimension of our engagement with the partner countries. And South Africa and Brazil also have initiated similar programs. During the COVID-19, we have seen how important skills are, and particularly when schools have gone through lockdown, the higher education had to be sort of administered through online classes. Access, equity, and inclusion have emerged extremely important facets of our development program. So I feel that skills are very important, and economizing on this probably would be important, because if access equity is to be ensured, you have to have necessary skills. So mutual training programs are definitely the way forward. And as Mark, you would agree, more and more digital banking and transfer of money also requires specific skills.
Indeed. Now, as far as human resources are concerned, would you say that besides workshops, seminars, and exchange programs, we need to do a lot more to create the digital ecosystem that is required to promote like-minded projects and investments?
One is the kind of lower and middle level skills where we need to standardize and certification. So you have to cooperate with the BRICS to do that, and also work on common pedagogy. So why? Because our resources actually will be not only supplying India, but be supplying the world. So it's very important that that market is open to us. The second level is, in a way, the more advanced skills, where we are kind of the third most prominent behind US and China. So there will be both cooperation and competition with the BRICS. So that's a slightly different thing. And finally, there is an R&D level where where we need focused bilateral cooperation. So depending on these three levels, there will be different levels of cooperation and competition. And to the second aspect of your question on what more we need to do, I think we need kind of specialized study groups. For example, one of the important ones is the things like hacking and securing domestic digital systems from international threats. So both Russia and China, in fact, have much more experience in that area. So I think they can contribute to the development of the other BRICS, which is India, Brazil, South Africa.
Dr. Chaturvedi, will the new technologies on their own foster an open, fair, and non-discriminatory trade environment and ensure greater participation in global value chains? Because the BRICS countries are committed to making efforts to create such an environment. What do you think?
That's where the crux comes in, Mark, because we have an inherent contradiction when it comes to resilient supply chains. And China is the one that has to, in a way, take up the global responsibility as one of the biggest trading partner for many countries. So how we ensure resilience of supply chains, how we ensure digital infrastructure which is non-disruptive and delivers cost-effective solutions. And China has much more to contribute in this area than many other countries, including in the BRICS grouping. So we hope more discussions would be there in the forthcoming BRICS summit when China's responsibility and the leadership would be discussed. During India's presidency, intra-BRICS cooperation, capacity building, and particularly initiatives that are including the kind of workshops, seminars, and exchange of programs that are needed for training and skills, they would come in, and more efforts would be required for China to deliver. And here, I think one more important dimension, Mark, is about the ethics in artificial intelligence. And that, I think, is the moral compass that BRICS countries would have to hold when it comes to AI. Niti Aayog recently issued a paper on ethics and artificial intelligence, and I think that's really the way forward for BRICS countries: cooperate and nurture industrial and economic initiatives that are related to AI. And I think that's extremely important.
Indeed, and BRICS itself came into being as an economic grouping. And we see that one of the key developments from BRICS was the new development bank. Now, India wants the NDB to be utilized more also for social infrastructure, that's education, health, community housing, etc., besides the promotion of industrial sector. How important is it to increase or enhance the scope of of the new development bank?
So, the NDB was set up to fill a large gap in financing of hard infrastructure, because the social return to infrastructure is more than the private. So, and we took a view. I was involved in that when I was in DC. So what we found was that, World Bank, ADB, we took all those resources and found there's still a huge gap. So NDB was put up for that to invest in emerging market economies. Now, I don't think we should lose that original gap, but some reorientation can be done in terms of the hard infrastructure, for example, of the digital economy. You need to have broadband go to everybody. That can be very costly, especially in a large country like India or Africa, where in the remote area. So one aspect is that, which I wholeheartedly support. The second aspect is really, one has to be a little careful, but I think the BRICS jointly can benefit if, the resources of the soft infrastructure which India and other countries have is supplied to, for example, South Africa, etc., where this helps in using our companies to do it rather than the developed country. So to some extent, this reorientation in soft infrastructure is also feasible and fine. But I think the effort should be, for example, in our case, to link it to the private sector.
Dr. Chaudhary, the BRICS industry ministers, they agreed to complement each other's strengths and share the best practices and also learn from weaknesses. Now, this kind of working relationship is extremely important, but from the point of view of meeting the SDGs together, how significant is it?
This is extremely important. As you might have realized during the G20 summit in Japan, India was the first country to suggest the idea of leveraging STI, science, technology, innovation, for sustainable development goals. Prime Minister Modi in 2018 in New York, on the sidelines of the UN Summit General Assembly, announced India's support, and a pilot project was launched, led by the Principal Scientific Advisor, Dr. Vijay Raghavan, along with 5 countries in Africa. So STI for SDGs going forward, particularly for 4 goals. Goal 2, which is about nutrition. Goal 3, which is about health. And that's where the larger challenge comes in. And goal 6 about water and sanitation. And goal 7 about renewable energy. So on all the 4 fronts, we have huge potential to contribute. And there are some very important areas where we can have mutual learnings. The trade ministers are absolutely right in terms of promoting this mutual learning processes, largely to strengthen the areas of cooperation and strengthening the modalities for such engagement. As of now, African countries have partnered. South Africa and Brazil are extremely keen, and so is China. So I hope in the forthcoming Indonesian presidency of G20 there would be some discussion. India by November would also be joining the Troika. And then
Yes.
we have in the following year our own G20 presidency. I'm sure this would be one of the major lead themes for our presidency as well.
Okay. Uh, Now, India as chair has, provided several global credible examples with our, our biometric system, Aadhaar, the payments system, the UPI, Arogya Setu, CoWIN, etc. India's digital footprint. How important is this as a trend setter, would you say?
Exactly, you're right. India is a pioneer in developing what we call digital public goods, like the UPI you mentioned, Aadhaar, etc. These are kind of the soft versions or digital versions of public goods, which we used to think of earlier. So India is a pioneer, but this is where that linkage, as I said, to private sector comes in. It's very important. The global game is not just, charity. I mean, every country uses what they develop to jointly with their private companies to also profit from it, rather than we kind of just get the honor and then all the companies from the West, etc., get the profits. So I'm not saying, I think certainly we should propagate this public goods, but we must involve our private sector fully into the game so that they can also profit from it. It's nothing wrong in doing that, because otherwise, let's say in Africa, Latin America, even Eastern Europe, they would just get Western companies to do this job, right? So that should not happen. So close interaction with Indian private sector is very important to use this effectively.
Dr. Chaturvedi, the finance ministers in their meeting, they had endorsed the technical report on social infrastructure, financing and use of digital technologies. Now, well, this is also to improve health and education sectors largely, but it's a good way of judging or the way a collaboration takes place after a pandemic. But do you think it's going to create a durable base for such collaboration in the future?
Certainly, Mark, if you look at huge traction for fintech across countries, financial technologies are becoming extremely important. The Reserve Bank of India has already announced digital currency by end of the year. More and more digitization of payment architecture and gateways, the role that UPI is playing now, I think is important. India has already strengthened this through Reserve Bank of India at the level of SAARC. We have promoted this with the CLMV countries, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, and we are also trying to see how BIMSTEC can be connected. So that way you find a greater traction for fintech and related technological solutions. The new development bank, the BRICS Bank as it is called, has also in a way tried to contribute for strengthening technological gateway and payment architecture. So we need to realize that during the COVID-19 crisis, the call by finance ministers to strengthen digitalization and digital payment and gateway architecture is now being scrutinized. The cyber security that is needed, the dimensions of our own digital currencies that we are talking about. So those mutual complementarities would have to be explored. But that, I think, is largely going to strengthen the broad ecosystem that we are talking of for the BRICS countries.
Negotiations on cooperation and mutual administrative assistance in customs matters have been completed. So will that help in greater trust and also easier movement of goods? And the larger question about, trust that is required, especially in the digital economy.
Certainly, digital processes help a lot in improving transparency and getting knowledge. So earlier, people who were, the legacy, the trading nations, particularly from the West and now China, tend to benefit disproportionately because people don't have information about all the entrepreneurs, etc. Like local, global, that Atmanirbhar we are doing, right? Part of it is connecting digitally remote areas which they would never hear of. So yes, So one aspect of digital is very positive and very beneficial and improves competition and brings goods and services from all over the world, including the poorer countries, the less well-off countries. So that's the positive part. But there is also and secondly, non-tariff barriers. We have often complained that many countries have, particularly those with which we have an adverse balance of trade, use non-tariff barriers, for example, against our agricultural exports, our drugs and pharma exports. So hopefully this can be used to increase and improve transparency in non-tariff barriers. So that's a second benefit. But the third aspect which one wants to just be cautious about is that it can also be used for misinformation. So that is something for safety, security, we should also, of course, being free, open, democratic countries, we also have to watch for that.
A final question, Dr. Chaturvedi. The central bankers, they discussed financial inclusion, the contingent reserve arrangement, and also information security cooperation. Now, what is the importance of economic stability in such times as global financial shocks, and how important are the central banks collaborating with each other?
It's extremely important, and Mark, as you would realize, their cooperation is possible at three broad areas. Number one is to collectively raise the bandwidth of spatial drawing rights, SDRs. And IMF has announced a package of something like $650 billion. But what is happening? Out of that $650 billion that they have announced, almost $350 billion are going to OECD countries, and only $21 billion are coming to least developed countries. So BRICS, as they are going to provide the global leadership, would have to behave very responsibly. And again, I would like to re-emphasize that China would have to provide the global leadership that BRICS needs at this point. And we would have to see that collectively we raise voice for least developed countries. The second area of central banks leadership comes in terms of the indigenously developed platforms, like for instance, for JAM, Trinity, we have the platform, the RTGS, the UPI and BHIM are the programs that India is offering to other countries. China would also have to come forward to see how compatibility and convergence and intertransportability of data across these portals is possible. And that's what's going to give the necessary traction across the globe. The third area is in terms of cooperating with our currencies that are there. Like for instance, in the vaccines, we created the CoWIN, which has a strengthened cooperation for partnership. So that I think is important. We are also trying to see how dimensions of cooperation are needed. So that probably would be equally important. These are the broad three areas that I feel we can really cooperate in and can strengthen the nature of SDRs that are needed, and particularly the operation of CRA.
And a final word on cooperation between the central banks. There is the contingency reserve arrangement, there's financial inclusion, there's information security cooperation. How important is economic stability and the role of the central banks in bringing this about?
If there are small shocks, then regional arrangement can help. But for big shocks, it's really an international system that works. But having said that, cooperation between the BRICS can be useful for things like payment systems. So, for example, of course, when there are UN sanctions or something, they apply to everybody, the whole world. So there's no issue with that. But when there are individual sanctions, one country or the other imposes specifically on specific countries where we don't agree, I think it's useful to have this cooperation among bankers of the BRICS, so that they can make sure that the trade among the BRICS and maybe the related countries function smoothly. So that would be my kind of two-part answer to that.
And with that, we conclude our special program on meetings in the run-up to the 13th BRICS Summit. I'd like to thank our guests, Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi and Dr. Arvind Virmani, and thank you very much for watching. Namaskar.